Happy St. Patrick's Day, and welcome back to the Oklahoma State University Archives Live. My name is Olivia Turner, and I'm joined today with David Peters, the head archivist for the OSU Library. David, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day. I kind of dropped the ball, not wearing green. Hopefully, nobody pinches me tonight. Well, last month, we talked about the campus buildings that makes this school so great. So this month, we thought it would be fitting to talk about the people who make OSU so great. OSU makes strong students to become strong leaders, and so it's only fitting that we talk about the notable alumni from OSU. So, David, we're just going to hop right in, and I have the first question ready for you.
Okay.
The first question today is, how does OSU remember those who have helped strengthen its community?
In a number of ways, from the Board of Regents approving resolutions, especially for faculty and others, and our state magazine, our alumni magazine, which has been produced for almost 90 years now. There are many articles in there about both students and alums and our faculty and staff. But then also through the naming of facilities, buildings, locations around campus. So we try to remember them in a variety of different ways. Many of them have been featured in newspaper articles produced by the Old Collie and other papers, and our yearbooks. We used to have yearbooks. So they've been featured in a number of different ways through the years.
Awesome. How does the university decide to dedicate a building or a statue after someone?
So there's a process involved with this. There's a Regents policy. It's Regents Policy 2.16. It's about a 4 or 5 page document, but it itemizes the kinds of things that can have a building, that authorizes a building to be named for someone. There's a process for them to go through. Usually it's a process that our administration takes place in cooperation with the OSU Foundation. There's some tax issues, so they have to make sure all the boxes have been checked appropriately. But there's a process, and then facilities can be named or renamed for individuals on campus.
Awesome. Has there been any recent dedication to any alumni or donors?
So one of the more recent buildings was the Nancy Randolph Davis Home Economics. Both the main building and I think the annex to that, which is attached to it to the west. That's one I could think of. Of course, Boone Pickens Stadium. There's a number of facilities that we've had come online recently, but I think the Nancy Randolph Davis is the most recent.
Awesome. I also understand that you brought some pictures for us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about those?
All right. So these are individuals whose names are featured on buildings. This first picture, this is Vera and Henry Bennett. Bennett was president here from 1928 to 1951, and there he is with his wife, Vera. There's a Bennett Residence Hall, which is named for Henry, Dr. Bennett, and then the Bennett Memorial Chapel, I believe, is named for both of them. And so that is the Bennetts. And then anyone who's been to Gallagher Iba Arena, that is Edward Clark Gallagher, who was head of our athletics department, head of physical education, and our first significant wrestling coach. There was a coach for 1 year who had one match, but after Gallagher started, we really took off in wrestling, and so Gallagher Hall is named after him. That's Ed Gallagher. This is Carl Gunderson. It's also one of the older buildings on campus. It's right across. It's just east of the Student Union, just north of the ConocoPhillips building. That's Gunderson Hall. It was built originally as an engineering building, originally known as the Engineering Building, and then later named for Dr. Gunderson, who was actually a mathematician. And this is Edmund Lowe, and so the building we're in right now is named for Mr. Lowe. Mr. Lowe was dean here for close to 25 years, I think, and just a remarkable individual, very critical to both the development of this facility, the design of this facility, worked very closely with Dr. Bennett. And the building was really just called the library. It wasn't until about 10 years after Lowe had retired that the building was named for Edwin Lowe. And this is Justin Morrill. The first building on campus to be named for someone was Morrill Hall. That was in 1906. The territorial legislature had decreed that no construction could take place until statehood. They were concerned at that time that the state capital would be moved to Oklahoma City. Well, they figured if they couldn't build a Capitol building in Oklahoma City, they could keep it in Guthrie. So we had to find a way of circumventing that restriction, and we thought by naming it after Morrill Hall, who was the senator from Vermont, who was instrumental in the land grant college system, we would get approval from the federal government, and so that's what we did, and that's why Morrill Hall was our last building built during the territorial period. So that's Justin Morrill. This is Julia Stout, Stout Hall. She was the Dean of Women here for a long period of time, and very active on campus, I think beginning in the late 20s, 30s, and 40s. So that's Julia Stout. And this is Jessie Thatcher Bost. Thatcher Hall was named for her. She is our first woman graduated in the class of 1897. There were only 3 people in that class, but she's our first woman graduate. And then I think there's a new Bost Hall, which is a residential hall, which is a part of the northwest quadrant of campus, which has residential housing. So Thatcher was named, that's her maiden name. And it's no longer used as a residence hall. It's used by ROTC now. So that's Jessie Thatcher Bost. And then this is John Whitehurst, for those who've ever been in Whitehurst Hall, where main administrative facilities are now. Whitehurst was actually was the head of the Board of Agriculture for a number of years, and when the building was completed, this is in about 1926, 1927, it was named for him. He had been head of the Board of Agriculture in Oklahoma. So John Whitehurst was very instrumental in the early development of campus. This is Frances Willard. She was a feminist and women's rights and temperance leader. And so she really had no official relationship with OAMC or OSU, but it was a women's residence hall, and they felt she would be an excellent symbol, an example for the women who were there. So Willard Hall was named for Frances Willard. And I think that's all the pictures we have.
Awesome. That was really insightful. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
If you are just now tuning in, this is the Oklahoma State University Archives Live. This month, we are talking about the people who have shaped OSU's campus. My question for you all is, when you attended OSU, who was the president at the time? Or if you didn't attend OSU, who was a president that you remember hearing about? Make sure to comment those below. And while you're doing that, we're going to continue on with some of our questions. The next question I have for you is, we all have love for those who have served as OSU's presidents, but who would you say is the most impactful president we've had?
From my experience, it still has to be Henry Garland Bennett. Bennett arrives here in 28. We're really a community college at that time. Most of our students are coming from Stillwater and Payne County, a few from the state, but we're not a very large institution. And Bennett develops a plan for dramatic expansion. People thought he was almost out of his mind, that they couldn't imagine that we'd ever be this big, and so Bennett was the one who kind of led us on that trip to a major land grant institution. He also had the benefit of being a president for almost 23 years, and so he had longevity. He also had a wonderful background in higher education before he came here. He developed relationships with our alumni that hadn't really been developed to that extent before he arrived. He worked with business leaders. He worked with legislators. He really was a remarkable individual and just changed the whole scale of campus. And his campus development plan, we called it the 25-year plan, but it moved the center of campus from Old Central, which was kind of the little quadrangle where campus was considered at the time, to the library, the current library. And you can see how much bigger the campus is with that as the center. So just a remarkable individual, and so for me, he still has to be the number one individual.
That's incredible. That is incredible. How many of our presidents actually graduated from Oklahoma State?
So we've had 2. We've had Oliver Willem, who graduated, I believe, in the 20s in animal science, animal husbandry at the time. And Willem had moved up. He'd gone away for a while, and then he came back, and then he began moving his way up through administration. And so by 1950, he is named executive vice president. This was a position they created because Dr. Bennett had been named by Harry S. Truman, President Truman, to serve as the first head of the Point 4 program, which meant he was away from campus a lot. So the Regents allowed Bennett to still be listed as the official president, but whenever he was away, Oliver Wilhelm was designated as the person who could then respond or answer questions, interpret policy, whatever it was. So Oliver Wilhelm was the first who served as president, and when Bennett was killed in a plane crash in 1951, within a year then Wilhelm was named as the next president. And Wilhelm really was the one who finished the Bennett plan. Bennett had died and the plan hadn't been completed yet. The library's not completed till 53, for example. And so Wilhelm really is the one who extends and completes the Bennett plan. And then our current president, V. Burns Hargis. President Hargis was a student here in the 60s, and now he's returned as our president. He's been here with us a little over 13 years. He is one of our longest serving presidents, and there's also been kind of a similar, if we had another 10 years like Bennett did, who knows, but there's been a development of campus in a lot of different ways, the Spears School, the Endeavor for Engineering, a lot of things have come along since President Hargis has been our leader. We had the $1 billion campaign, and so he's really, once again, changed the scale of what we see in campus development. So he's been instrumental.
Awesome. I'm going to miss him. Going to miss Burns. Has there been a time when we had a vice president of OSU or OAMC?
So until 1947, we never had a vice president, and then we named our first vice president. He was Dr. I don't know if he was a doctor. He was Philip Donnell. Donnell came out of the engineering school. By then it was still a school. It hadn't become a college yet. And so he had been head of engineering for quite a while. And in 47, then he was named vice president for building and campus development. There was so much building going on. Bennett felt he really needed someone with engineering background to kind of supervise all of that. And so that's when Donnell was named as our first vice president, and that was to supervise all the campus construction that was going on.
Interesting. Definitely interesting. I love hearing about those who have shaped OSU's campus because it's so inspiring for me and for other students to learn about them. Although I don't personally know anybody that we are talking about today, we all share something in common. We each love OSU. Now, what I want to know from our audience is, have you ever met any inspirational figures from OSU? Maybe you met Boone Pickens or even had a conversation with Garth Brooks when he was a student. Maybe you had a conversation with whoever was the president during your college years. Make sure to comment those below. Also, if you have any questions or comments about Oklahoma State in general, feel free to comment those as well. We always love to hear what you have to say. While you all are commenting, I actually had the opportunity to go around campus and visit some important figures myself. Make sure you guys take a look. Let me tell y'all, it was so cool to be able to do that because it was like I was looking at history right in the eyes. It was also great because I was also able to come up with some more questions for this broadcast. My next question for you, David, is, what can you tell us about Boone Pickens?
I can tell you a little bit about Mr. Pickens. He was born in Holdenville, Oklahoma. He was an only child. That was in the late 20s. By the early 30s, the family had moved to Amarillo, Texas. After World War II, he was only, I think, 17 or 18 when the war was over, so I don't think he never had a chance to serve. But I think he got a basketball scholarship at Texas A&M, and so he goes there, tries out Texas A&M, and then the next year he moves up here to Oklahoma Agricultural Mechanical College. So he transfers to OSU, OAMC at the time. He graduates, I think, in 1951 with a geology major. Begins working for Phillips Petroleum Company. I think he worked for Phillips for about 3 years or so. He wildcatted for a while, doing exploratory wells, and then begins the development and formation of his company. Eventually becomes Mesa Petroleum, and from there, his investments and his business acumen take off. And so, he's in the oil, natural gas business for quite a while. Does very well. As Mesa is beginning kind of transition, he then eventually sets up BP. It's an investment portfolio company, and does extremely well with that. But he's ridden the wave several times. I mean, he was a risk taker, and so he would. Gain millions and lose millions, but he was a risk taker. But he was also, besides being an entrepreneur and a businessman, he was very generous and a benefactor not only to Oklahoma State University, but he was a benefactor to other places too, other hospitals, especially in Texas. But we have benefited from his generosity a great deal. And so the School of Geology is named for Mr. Pickens. Of course, our stadium is named for Mr. Pickens. And so, but not only did he donate for facilities, but he also supported scholarships, supported professorships, and those kinds of funds for those activities. But he also inspired others to give, which was really significant. So not only did he give, but he inspired others to give. So that's kind of a quick synopsis, but and then of course he's passed away fairly recently, but he lived to be 91 years old.
That's impressive. And it was also a very good synopsis. I learned a lot during that.
Oh.
There are some impactful figures from Oklahoma who have buildings named after them, like Henry Bellman and Lloyd Noble. What can you tell us about them?
So Henry Bellman was a farm boy from near Billings, Oklahoma. I grew up there, went to Oklahoma Agricultural Mechanical College. Then he served in World War II, and then after college he came back. He was farming, and eventually he decided to run for public office. And I think he served in the state legislature for a while. But eventually he runs for governor, and he is elected, I think our first Republican governor, serves a term, and then he runs for the Senate. He's elected to, I think, at least 2 terms in the Senate. This is as a Republican. And at that time, especially when he first was elected governor, not many Republicans were getting elected in Oklahoma, so that was a little unusual. He developed close ties with Richard Nixon. In fact, he served as Richard Nixon's nationwide campaign director for one of Nixon's campaigns. It must have been the 70 campaign or 72. I'm not sure about those details, but anyway, and then after serving 2 terms in the Senate, he comes back, and then eventually, within a few years, he runs for governor of Oklahoma again. Is then reelected as governor of Oklahoma. So just a remarkable gentleman. He remained active his whole life, and so when our research facility was needing a name, I think Henry Bellman's name is very appropriate for it. So that's former Governor and Senator Henry Bellman. And then the other gentleman was Lloyd Noble, and actually his name was Samuel Lloyd Noble. He went by Lloyd, but he also was from southeast Oklahoma, got involved in the oil and gas business, and his firm was kind of instrumental in applying new technologies to the oil and gas exploration. He died as a fairly young man. He was only, I think, 52 or 53 when he passed away. But before he died, he set up, I think it's the Samuel Roberts Noble Foundation is the name of the foundation. They were mostly concerned with in supporting agriculture and farmers. And so when we developed it was originally called the 21st Century Center. We now know it as the Noble Research Center. But that the Noble Foundation provided significant funds for the construction of that facility for natural resources and agriculture.
Awesome. Now, earlier this week, you actually sent me a list of the buildings around campus that are named after people. Just how many people just how many buildings do, I'll get there. It's a little bit of a tongue twister. How many buildings do we have that are named after people?
Near as I can tell, about 60, 61, in which there's some individuals' name associated with that building. Now, sometimes it's a couple, like Vera and Henry Bennett for the chapel. The Bartlett Center is actually named for Pat and Pete Bartlett. And so sometimes it's a couple, but I believe there's 60 or 61 facilities that have been named for individuals. There's a few other buildings, like the ConocoPhillips Alumni Center, which is named really for a corporation. But there's quite a few facilities that are named for folks.
And do any of them have anything in common?
Well, like Bud Saratine, there's the Saratine Center for the Performing Arts, and there's also the Saratine Wellness Center. So those both are related to Martin, even known as Bud Saratine, was very generous in supporting those two buildings. Mr. Pickens has the School of Geology, which is just a part of the Noble Research Center, but in the Pickens, stadium. And so, Bennett Memorial Chapel and Bennett Residence Hall. So there's some that have, some people have more than one facility named for them. There's a variety of folks that have been, we've appreciated their contributions and we've named facilities for them.
Awesome. Recently, the Human Sciences buildings have been renamed for Nancy Randolph Davis. What can you tell us about her?
So Nancy Randolph graduated from Langston University with her bachelor's degree. It was about 1948. And then she started teaching in the public schools, and she taught 1 year. And in that first year of teaching, her principal at the school encouraged her to get a master's degree if she could. Well, there was no graduate program at Langston for her. She was interested in home economics education. And so she applied here, and she was denied. At the time, we were still a segregated school, and so she was denied admittance. But at the same time, there was a case going through the courts in OU about admittance of an African-American student to the law school. And so there was a kind of a brief window where she was encouraged to come back, actually to physically come to campus and apply again. And even when she came back to campus to apply, the person she visited with really discouraged her, but she turned her application in, and it was accepted. So her application was accepted during the summer of 1949, and she is the first African-American student to be actually admitted to Oklahoma Agricultural Mechanical College. So quite a remarkable achievement. And then she initially was segregated within the classroom. Either she was separated from the class or had to view the class from outside the room. It was a horrendous situation, but she muddled through. She had some of the best scores in her class. Her other classmates began encouraging her and encouraging the faculty members too that she needs to come into the class. And so it was a difficult transition, but she was able to make that transition over time. She lived with the principal of the Black High School in Stillwater. So she had some security there, and she then graduated a few years later. She's not our first African-American graduate, but she is the first African-American student to be able to enroll and be accepted at Oklahoma Agricultural Mechanical College. Remarkable woman. And then went on to a teaching career after she finished her degree here.
Awesome. Bonnie wants to let us know that she actually came to OSU during the Halligan years, which is pretty awesome.
Oh, Bonnie did.
Bonnie did, yes. And then John commented saying that John R. Campbell was president when he was an undergraduate. And then William also has a question for you. David, if you were able to have a building named after you, what would its function be?
Well, thank you, William. I haven't really thought about that too much. Hopefully it'll be related somehow to academics. Maybe something in the special collections area, if we ever had like a museum. We have the art museum now. Maybe someday it would be nice if we had a natural history and culture museum. I wouldn't mind being associated with that. So something like that.
That would be pretty cool. If people wanted to learn more about notable figures to OSU, where could they go to look?
They can come to us in the archives. We have some biographical information here. Of course, there's the yearbooks, the memorial resolutions from the regents are a source of information for folks. And then if they subscribe to the alumni magazine, the state magazine, there's a lot of information in there. And we have older issues. We have them going back to the first issue of 1929. So we'd be glad to help people look for folks if they're interested in knowing more about them. And that's the kind of thing we do, enjoy doing it.
Awesome. So we do have a question from Helen, and it's actually 2 questions.
Okay.
So the first one is, how did Williams Hall get named?
So thank you, Helen. So Williams Hall was the first building built as the library. So once the one room of the library that was in Old Central had exceeded its space allotment, they built the library. And the library had not only the library, it had also classrooms. But eventually it was named Williams Hall for Benjamin Franklin Williams, who was a faculty member. And so that's how the building got its name. And most people know it as Williams Hall. And it retained that name until it was torn down in the late 60s.
Awesome.
What was the second part? Okay.
Sorry. Her second question is, could you please give Dr. Wilhelm's service dates?
So Dr. Wilhelm, I think, was brought in spring of 1952. I think the formal ceremony took place with the dedication of this building in 1953, spring of 1953, but I think he started in the position in 1952, and then he served until about 1965 or 66. So he was here like 13, 14 years. By the mid-60s, at some point there's a transition to Dr. Kalm. I think Dr. Kalm starts about 65 or 66. So Wilhelm was president from Bennett's death in 1951, officially appointed in 52 until about 65 or 66. I'll have to get the exact dates for you, Helen. I'll see if we can find those.
Awesome. Well, David, you have been so great in helping us get to know some of the notable figures around campus. Is there anything else you wanted to include before we sign off for the evening?
No, we've just been blessed with many wonderful people at OSU, and so, there's a lot of other spaces that have had naming opportunities for them. Within the library, we have study rooms that have been named for individuals, and there are special spots all over our campus that have been designated, in honor of or memory of individuals, and I think that adds a special touch to our campus, and there's a procedure for even that to take place too. It's a part of the naming of buildings. There's a kind of a codicil about naming these spaces, plazas, and architectural kinds of landscape architecture features. So, but there's many ways that people have donated and contributed, not just through financial donations, but through service in their lives, and so we try to show our appreciation for that.
Awesome. Well said. I like to think about, who am I going to school with now who's going to change OSU's future? And sometimes I like to think that maybe I'll hit it big and maybe I'll be able to give back to the school. That would be a pretty cool experience. If you want to learn more about OSU's archives, visit archives.library.okstate.edu. Or if you have any questions or comments, feel free to DM us on Facebook at Oklahoma State University Archives. David, thank you so much for being with me today, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. As always, go Pokes!